Hello everybody, it's I, Zankoku, bringing you video number 2 of my 2018 Films in Review series. The first video was my most surprising movies of 2018. Check that video out. Link in the description, end credit thing, cards if those are still a thing. Anyways, today's video is going to be my most disappointing films of 2018. And as always, if you want me to review a film that I talk about, please leave a comment in the comment section and I will do it. So, kicking off, most disappointing films of 2018. Just because these movies are disappointing to me doesn't mean that I think they're bad movies. It doesn't mean they're not good. It just means that when the credits rolled, I was disappointed, and disappointed enough to want to talk about it. So, kicking off, number 5, my most disappointing movies of 2018 is Black Panther. Oscar nominee for Best Picture, Black Panther. So Black Panther, in a bubble, by itself, is a fine superhero movie. It's got some good action, it's got some decent characters, it has a plot that has some interesting points in it, and at the end, you could say that it really did its job as a superhero action film. However, the problem is this movie came out after Thor Ragnarok, probably the second best Marvel movie of all time. This movie, Thor Ragnarok, is just phenomenal, is awesome. And so the bar was super high, and coming off of that, and leading into Infinity War, this movie felt kind of flat. The characters, for the most part, were kind of flat, uninspired in my opinion. I think that Black Panther had more character depth in Civil War than he did in this movie. I think the revenge aspect was a bit more, gave a bit more emotion. It almost felt like a little bit of just sleepwalking through this for Black Panther. And the whole dynamic between Black Panther and Warmonger and the philosophies and the kind of, interventionist versus isolationist thing, they just sort of scratched the surface. And I know it's a Marvel movie and we can't get too deep, but I think they could have dug a little bit more, focused maybe a little bit more on that dynamic, and perhaps it would have led to better character development. And one of the big problems is, when it comes to characters, the best characters are not the main characters by far. And one of the best characters, Claw, well, he just kind of gets in like about halfway into the movie. So another classic example of Marvel wasting characters, but it really felt like a waste in this movie. And the thing is, I try to think back. I think back to all the Marvel movies that I watched, and I can think of standout moments that you shake my head, yeah, that was great, that was great, that was great. And honestly, there weren't very memorable moments in this movie, except for some bad things, like killing Claw and recycling the car flip from Civil War, which is just boggles my mind. It's like, you didn't have anything else? Did you have time not to do anything else? I mean, yes, there was the CGI mess of a fight toward the end, but honestly, all I really think about is the train and the adamantium, I guess, vibranium track system that they have going on there. But honestly, that's about it. Everything just felt kind of bland. There wasn't that Marvel charisma that was going through this movie. Sure, there were some jokes, but it just didn't have that feeling. It almost felt like they didn't really have much to go on, and they kind of just pieced it together and threw it into like the Plot-O machine and go, okay, this is the plot, and it's very basic and not much nuance. You didn't get any feel for Wakanda. I mean, except for you got this big battlefield, very convenient plains for battle right by the spire structure castle thing, And it just, I mean, the city itself, you see pictures of it, you have a brief scene within it, but you don't get really a sense for Wakanda, the people, or anything like that. And it almost felt like they needed to just make the movie so that they had the movie and didn't really have any plans for anything after this. And honestly, at the end, I felt disappointed because it was not to the level I expected for a Marvel movie. It was entertaining. It had enjoyable parts. It had its fun parts. But overall, it just doesn't stand up to the other movies that Marvel has made. And like I said, it was disappointing. I'm sorry. I know it made a lot of money. I know that a lot of people say that it's really great, but I just don't see it. I just see too many flaws in this movie. And there you have it. Black Panther, number 5. So moving on to number 4 in my most disappointing movies of 2018. And that movie is Halloween. Yes, Halloween. The sequel to the original Halloween. And once again, this is not a bad movie. And as a horror movie by itself, it's actually pretty great. It's got some great kills, has some solid scares, great atmosphere, and I mean, the problem again is a contextual problem. This is a Halloween movie, and this is supposedly the sequel to Halloween. So it really destroys Halloween 2 and everything else, story-wise, and I think that's the problem because its approach to being a sequel was kind of like how The Force Awakens was an approach to being a sequel, in that it just recycled a lot of things from the original. I mean, Michael Myers in the original, he kills someone, goes to a mental institution, escapes the mental institution, goes to Haddonfield, kills a bunch of people. This movie, he killed a bunch of people in the first one, goes to a mental institution, escapes the mental institution, goes back to Haddonfield, kills a bunch of people. Wash, rinse, repeat. So, yeah, that part stuck in my mind, how very similar the movie was. It felt like it didn't want to take a lot of risks, and when it did try to take a risk, like the whole new Dr. Loomis story, they didn't really do much with it. It was just there for like a moment and then smashed into the concrete, if you know what I mean. And the thing is, that was kind of interesting and that was kind of different and it gave a different perspective. And I thought they could have probably done a little bit more with that, but they didn't. And so what I have in this movie is just this feeling of like, it's kind of recycled. Yes, I like the fact that it is much more violent, a lot more brutal kills, a higher body count, but in the end, I didn't like the way the movie ended. I didn't like some of the character decisions that were being made. I mean, if you're supposed to be like the survivalist, you would choose better weaponry for what you're going to be doing. You know, you would probably have created a better trap system in your home. I mean, you've got the mannequin room. I mean, that is just a disaster waiting to happen. I just, like, it boggled my mind there. And the problem that plagued my mind once the credits rolled is a big, big problem, in my opinion, because it's a question that I thirst the answer for. I am thirsting this answer because it is to me, it would have been an interesting thing to talk about, to cover, to show. And that is, this is the sequel, a direct sequel to Halloween 2. Or to Halloween. So this is the new Halloween 2. The end of Halloween, Dr. Loomis shoots Michael Myers. He falls off the balcony. They look over the edge. He's gone. So we don't get any, how did they catch Michael Myers? There's no, they did not tape any or film any scene where, at least I haven't watched any of the Blu-ray extras yet, but I'm going to. But as far as I know at this moment, there's no indication of like how did he go? He doesn't seem like the kind of guy who would just raise his hands up and go, okay, you got me, put the cuffs on me. No, I mean, there would have to have been some violence going down. And the fact that they just kind of not even talk about it really, really irked me, because I think that is an important thing to cover. At least in part 2, the original part 2, they cover that. They acknowledge that happened and continue on. I mean, he just got up and continued his murdering ways. But in this, you don't know. You don't know. And that really kind of got me. But overall, the movie is still pretty good. Very entertaining. The problem is, it didn't want to take any chances. And what chances it took were very light. And they left some things unanswered from the first movie. And this is a sequel that they really should have addressed, because it kind of leaves an empty feeling, at least in my heart, in my experience for this movie. I still like the movie. I just would have liked it a whole lot better, and might have made my best of list if it weren't for the problems that I have stated. So there you have it. Number 4, Halloween. Okay, number 3 on my most disappointing list, and this movie is Tales from the Hood 2. Now, I loved the first Tales from the Hood movie. I thought it was a well-balanced anthology movie. It did just enough things right in all the right spots to be a very entertaining and enjoyable watch. And it's kind of hard to do with anthologies, because sometimes you just get these really weak stories in there, and you have that kind of loose connection that they try to do between the movies. And the first one did a really good job, and I was excited when I found out that Tales from the Hood 2 was coming out, and that the same people behind it, the director and producers, were behind this one. I thought, okay, well, this might be good. And then I found out it was going to be direct-to-video, and then I'm like, okay, this might not be as good. And so when I saw it was on Netflix, I clicked to watch it, hoping for the best, and I got way worse than I could possibly imagine. This movie is atrocious. This movie is an abomination. This movie is a slap in the face to the original movie. And it's such a shame, because the original was a great idea, and they really could have built upon that and created a nice series of anthology movies, or who knows, like an anthology television show, Tales from the Hood. But instead, what we have is a movie that is trying to be more of a comedy than a horror movie. There's nothing scary. The effects are horrible. The acting is atrocious. The characters could not be any more one-dimensional if you tried. I mean, it's just like, take a stereotype and just make it a super stereotype. It's sort of like a caricature of a stereotype. And these characters are all that, and the movie is just ridiculous and stupid, and you can't take it seriously. And the problem is, there's a segment, the last story, they try to be serious, but it's so out of place and feels so off that you couldn't even, you just had a hard time buying into it and watching it and enjoying any piece of this. It is just god-awful. Let me just give you an example of the first story, which honestly is probably the high point, which is sad. I know you want to lead strong, but it's all downhill from here, but you're already starting at the bottom of a hill before you started to get into the abyss. So the movie, the first story is this blonde girl goes to this museum where there's this doll being displayed, and apparently she collects these dolls and loves these dolls and wants to buy it, but the museum curator's like, no, it's history of evil and sadness and oppression, and they're like, so she's like, okay, fine, whatever. Comes back later with some friends, breaks into the museum, steals the doll, but accidentally breaks the case, and then the doll becomes a 7-foot-tall version of itself. And yes, for any of those who watched the original Tales from the Hood, it's not the same doll as in that great Corbin Burnson little show that they had with the small dolls. No, it's not that. No. Anyways, 7 foot tall, kills all her friends, and then gonna kill her, but she's like, no, I love you, you're so great, you're great. And so they imply they have sex, and then the final scene is her with the pregnant belly, and it bursts, and all these baby dolls fly out of it, and that sounds awesome, but in practice, in execution, it was garbage. And I'm like, what the hell is this shit? And like I said, it was downhill from there. And the movie is just bad. It is a slap in the face. It is insulting. The movie is insulting. The movie's bad. It's horrible. Don't waste your time. Watch the original and try to forget this movie ever happened, because it is a disgrace. It is absolute trash. And yeah, I was very disappointed, because I thought, even if it was half as good as the original, even if it was quarter as good as the original, it would have been still fine. But this was negative territory to the max. So yeah, horrible. Number 3 most disappointing movies of 2018, Tales from the Hood 2. Oh, God. Moving on to number 2 on my most disappointing movies of 2018, and oh my God, all these movies, I could just talk for hours. This video could be like 7 hours long. But I gotta try to condense it down. So number 2 on my most disappointing movies of 2018 is Hereditary. Now, once again, Hereditary is not a bad movie. It's actually a pretty great movie. But as a horror movie, it's a failure. It's a failure as a horror movie. And I will tell you why. And this might be a little spoilerish, so I'll try to be as vague as possible. But this movie was sold to me as the next Exorcist, or this generation's Exorcist, as completely frightening, scary, unnerving. All the headlines with the exclamation points, exhilarating, and all that stuff. And the problem is, it starts up pretty good, kind of creepy, kind of strange, and the first act, all right, it's building up. It's going to be one of those slow burn movies, and then the second act happens, and everything just changes. Everything about this movie, the dynamic of the movie, changes completely. And at the end of the film, it feels like this movie would have been served better if it was not a horror movie, but more of a family drama about loss and coping and the disillusion of the family, and maybe even the descent into madness because of grief. And it would have been a powerful movie, and probably would have been in the Oscar talks. And my God, what's her name? Would have probably nominated for Best Actress. She definitely deserved a nomination for that. And it's another example of why the Oscars and the Academy are bullshit, because her performance in this movie was well above and beyond anything I've seen this year and in several years past. I mean, her performance is spectacular. I say watch this movie just based on her performance alone, because it is spectacular. But moving back to why it was disappointing. So, the second half of this movie, there is a tragedy that not the second half, the second act, that kicks off the second act. And the tone of the movie completely changes, and the weight of that tragedy that happens is so heavy on the narrative that by the time the third act kicks in and the weirdness gets ratcheted back up to horror levels, it's too late I had no more emotion. I was numb. It was a numbing, life-draining experience. And when the third act happened, I really didn't care anymore. In fact, I was glad that people were dying because they were now released of this situation. And besides the ridiculousness, the failure of any of that stuff to be scary or freaky, it was just weird and felt out of place at that point. And this is the problem with a slow burn movie. You kind of have to have it be like Chinese water torture. That slow drip, that drip, 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 drip. But it's there. It happens. It's constant. It builds upon itself. And by the time you get to the end of the movie, and one of my favorite go-to movies when talking about slow burn and that drip is the original Japanese version of Dark Water. That movie, that drip just builds and builds and builds until it is a literal flood of dread and horror. And that is like my go-to example for how you do slow burn. And the problem with this is that you get the little dripping going on in the first act. When the second act happens and that tragedy occurs, it stops dripping. You have maybe a little sprinkle here and there of some of the weirdness and some of the horror elements, but it is so overshadowed and so just the loudness, I guess you would say, of the situation drowns out everything else. And that you're more seeing a movie about this family falling apart and trying to deal with this tragedy. And that's one of the things about horror movies is like, when you have a situation that is horrific happen, you kind of don't get to dwell in it. You don't get to marinate in that because there's this constant danger and presence of death right around the corner that you can't, you have to go, okay, that's crap that happened, but man, murderer coming after you right now, so we got to kind of put that aside and keep going. And so you don't always get that opportunity to really think about and digest and go through the emotions of this situation and its weight. And the problem is you marinated in it way too long and it drowned everything out. It was way too much. I mean, it was brilliant and it was great and it was powerful and it was emotional and it was super well acted and well written. I mean, the way that the brother reacted and how things played out was just spectacular. And man, he did a damn good job acting in this movie too. I mean, everybody pretty much nailed it in the acting department in this movie. The problem is, it kills the horror aspect. It was no longer scary. It was no longer frightening. It didn't mess with my mind. It kind of felt like it did the rest of the movie a disservice, that third act, and it felt a little bit kind of stupid. And I can only think of other movies that reminded me of this that did a better job when it comes to being a horror movie, and that was The Skeleton Key. The Skeleton Key does this whole trickeration ritual type thing better than this movie because it remains tight and focused on I am a horror movie. And the other movie that I'm thinking about is the Neon Demon, which kept its batshit crazy insanity going throughout the entire narrative. And of course, while talking about this movie, the battery dies on my camera. I mean, I guess I've been talking way too long. But in the end, Hereditary, great movie, disappointing horror movie. Number 2 on my most disappointing list. So now, moving on to my number 1 most disappointing movie of 2018. And this movie was a movie that I was looking forward to since it was teased. And when I finally got to the theaters to watch it, oh my god, it was super disappointing. And that movie was The Nun. Now the Conjuring series, I love the Conjuring series. The first Conjuring movie is one of the greatest horror movies ever made. honestly, I think it would be in my top 5 if I did my top 10 horror movies of all time list again. And The Conjuring 2 might actually be in the top 10. I'd have to really think about it, but those movies were really great. And then Annabelle Creation was spectacular. Also, really loved that movie. And, you know, they had one bad movie, Annabelle, but that was the second movie in this universe. So you would think they would have learned from their mistakes. But unfortunately, The Nun just falls apart, which is a shame because it has decent cast, it has great atmosphere, it has an interesting plot going on in there. The thing is that it's executed poorly. There is CGI in there where it should have been practical. There was just these plot choices that really didn't work, and the story became convoluted and kind of a mess, and it led to places that I didn't want it to go, and was very, very disappointing. Which is sad, because, like, first of all, the atmosphere in this movie is spectacular. I love the atmosphere. I love the whole nun convent situation that's going on. They don't do it enough nowadays. And there was a great amount of creepiness in this film. And so you have all this good stuff and the pedigree of the Conjuring series, and you waste it by really not even delving into the whole nun aspect. Like it would have been much more interesting to see how it was like some nun getting gradually possessed by the evil demon. Instead, the evil demon's already there and sort of there, and this whole idea that, like, are the nuns alive or are the nuns dead? And if they're dead, then how does it explain the person from the Annabelle Creation? Because she should be dead, so is she dead in Annabelle Creation? Or I don't know, it's weird, it's strange, it doesn't make sense. And so I did a review for my 31 Nights of Halloween Horror. So if you want to watch that, I will have a link in the description, cards, whatever. So you can watch that, where I can talk about that more in depth. But in the end, we had the potential for a really great addition to the Conjuring franchise. Something that would have been scary and frightening and awesome. And, you know, maybe a little bit in my heart, I thought that, you know, you're rated R. You could have a little nunsploitation going on in there. But in the end, you didn't get any of that. And part of that was kind of disappointing too. But just the fact that they dropped the ball in this was very, very disappointing. This was the movie that I was looking forward to the most when I was looking at horror movies upcoming for 2018. And it was a spectacular failure and very disappointing. It was the most disappointing movie, in my opinion. I wanted it so bad to be good. I really did. And it failed me. It failed the audience. It made a whole lot of money. So perhaps the Nun prequel will do what the Annabelle prequel did and be better. But in the end, yeah, it was super disappointing. And more disappointing than all these, like, and this is the problem, it's like, with all these movies, like, they were still good, except for Tales from the Hood 2. I just didn't expect it was going to be good, and didn't really think it was going to be absolute trash, absolute garbage fire trash, and it was, so that was disappointing. But this was the movie that, like, it was going to be the thing. And those other movies, even though they were disappointing, I still enjoyed them. I still felt like I got my money's worth. They're movies that I've picked up on Blu-ray for the most part, but this movie, I can't even bring myself to pull the trigger, even though I'm like one of those guys that goes, I have a collection, I need to complete the collection. But yeah, it just thoroughly upset me when the credits were rolling. And I was like, this is just, no, they can't have done this. But they did, and yeah, so talk about disappointing. A lot of you probably think, well, that's a disappointing way to end your disappointing list. I was expecting you to be a little bit more insane about this movie, but honestly, it had all kinds of potential, and that's one of the things that when I talk about disappointments is movies that have a lot of potential and then they squander it. They don't do enough with it, and they just have it all fall apart. And those are the most frustrating movies for me, because it's like, I see it, it's there, and it's so close, but in the end, it just didn't work. It just did not work. And this movie, there you have it. Number one most disappointing movie of 2018, The Nun. It just did not work. So let's recap before I end the video. Number 5, Black Panther. Still like the movie, just kind of plain. Number 4, Halloween. Really like the movie, just too recycled. Didn't answer a bunch of questions and didn't agree with some character choices. Number 3, Tales from the Hood 2. Wasn't expecting much and got completely a million times worse. A million times worse. It is trash. Don't even watch it. Number 2, Hereditary. Was expecting a horror movie. Got a failure of a horror movie. Yet it was still a very good movie, and I still suggest people watching it. Just don't go in there with this idea of a horror movie. Maybe it'll be more horrifying because you're not thinking it's a horror movie. I don't know, but to me, it failed to be a horror movie. And number 1, The Nun, just fails the legacy of The Conjuring, fails to be a good movie, which is really bad because it had a great concept and great atmosphere and had all the pieces to succeed and just didn't do anything good with them. So there you have it. My top 5 most disappointing movies of 2018. And I will see you next time with my final video, which will be the best movies of 2018. So until then, everyone out there in the internet, leave a like, thumbs up, comment in the comment section, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I will see you next time. And stay scary, internet. Yeah.